Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Naruto was Laharl's successor, and got Harem, part 1. So before we start, please go check out the author of this fanfic, Chibi-Reaper. Link is in the description. Also subscribe to our channel, and like this video. So let's begin the video. Laharl leaned back into his throne, and stared at the ceiling of his throne room. To put it bluntly, he was bored. Extremely so. For centuries, he had been the undisputed overlord of his Makai. Nobody even considered challenging his rule anymore. Where did that leave him? Sure, he was in charge, and would be for quite some time, but being overlord was surprisingly far less fun than he'd expected. For the first 100 years or so, there seemed to be a new challenger every week. First the ball incidents. Then when Edna ran off to Veldime because he'd eaten her last pudding, with the whole Xenon thing, the excitement had never died down for a while. But eventually, fewer and fewer were willing to challenge him. After all, he was the almighty overlord. These days, he was lucky to receive a challenger every 20 or 30 years, and they were usually headstrong idiots that thought since they'd never lost a battle wherever they'd come from, they were invincible. It would usually take only a single attack to brutally demolish them. No fun at all. Of course there were demons and monsters out there that were strong enough to give him something of a challenge, but most of them were perfectly happy fighting each other instead of him, and would likely run away if he ever happened to drop into the middle of a battle, and it would be unseemly should he disguise himself, just to be able to fight someone. His counselors could become extremely irritating should he do anything unseemly towards his status as overlord. So that was out. A thought struck his mind, a sudden stroke of brilliance cutting through his boredom. It would be unseemly for him to disguise himself and hunt down fights unless he was training himself a successor to take his place. The counselors had been nagging at him for several decades to either find a mate and bear himself an heir, or select someone to train as his successor. He would have to think carefully about this. He stood up, casually walking out of the throne room, ignoring the shocked cries of the senile counselors. Nobody ever came to him with their problems anyway. The whole court thing was just a show to assure the counselors that he was following traditions, like a proper overlord. If he thought any of the feeble old men would be able to put up a fight, he would debate just killing them all. But weak as they were, there would be no point to it. Now someone to train as a successor, someone weak, so that the training wasn't too short. A human would be perfect. But the stupid counselors would never accept one as successor, and there was the problem of their short lifespan. He had been completely shocked when Gordon had died of old age less than a century after they first met. No, a human might be capable of growing powerful enough to achieve overlord levels of strength, but they wouldn't live long enough to be a viable candidate. A demon would work, but if he chose a demon from his Makai, then word would get around too fast, and his chosen one would be killed by a more powerful demon in the hopes of stealing the position as successor, sending him back to square one. He couldn't take a demon from someone else's Makai either, which would cause all sorts of questions, leading up to the same problem. What did that leave? Half demons? No, it was rare for a demon to willingly breed with a human. The last one was a couple 100 years ago, and he was living in peace in a human world. He was also far too powerful for Laharl's purposes. So just what did that leave? Not an angel, certainly. That was out of the question, and patently ridiculous. How depressing. And this had been such a good idea too, just like 10 years ago when he decided to send a search party to follow the bijou that had defected. He froze, before turning and jogging down a different hallway. Edna! He slid to a stop in front of a specific door, and kicked it open. Edna was snoring loudly, tangled up in her bedsheets. His eye twitched, and he turned around. Seconds later he had returned to the room, with a large bucket. Edna, this is your last warning. Get up, or else. She continued sleeping, and a wide grin crossed his face as he lifted the bucket. A shrill scream erupted throughout the entirety of the castle. Edna sat up on the edge of her bed, wringing the chilly water out of her hair, and glaring at Laharl. What the hell do you want, Laharl? You know that I always take a nap at this time of day, do you? I hadn't noticed because the stupid counselors make me sit in a chair in an empty room for hours on end. If they're that irritating, then just kill them, moron. I'm thinking about it. Maybe if Baal came back and possessed one of them, it would be worth the time it would take to kill them. But anyway, I need to know what happened to the reports on the bijou that left after my old man died. You woke me up for that. Sheesh, you guys in the file room, somewhere under B, just like Anyoni in the castle could have told you. Laharl nodded, and left, leaving Edna free to flop back down into bed, and finish her nap right into the wet spot. Damn it! By the time Edna caught up to Laharl, he'd already located the folder holding the reports he'd wanted, and spread them out all over the table. She stood behind him, reading over his shoulder, as he separated the reports into two piles. The larger one, he slipped back into the sleeve, and set aside. Ah, Laharl? Is there a point to this? 10 years ago, to relieve the monotony, I sent a search party out after the 9 bijou, led by QB, that left to go terrorize a human world after my father died. My hopes were that, with any luck, all 9 of them would be rampaging around, and I'd have an excuse to go bash their heads in, as a sign of good faith to the human worlds, of course. Unfortunately, they had almost all been defeated already, by the humans of the place they had chosen at random, not killed, but sealed away. Into things jewels, weapons, and more recently, humans. After reviewing the reports, I reluctantly decided it would not be worth it to hunt down the only bijou that had remained unsealed. A few years later I sent them back for a follow-up report, to see if any of the seals locking the bijou away had begun to weaken, reasoning that if the seals broke, releasing even one bijou from its prison, then it could be used as an excuse to allow me to hunt them down, but the seals were holding perfectly. Laharl sighed, as he leaned back for a moment, then returned to poring over the reports. It's been years since I've had a decent fight. I know full well that there are beings, human and demon, that can even yet challenge me, but they respect me, and fear me too much for them to seek me out for battle, and should I seek them out they would either flee or forfeit. I cannot seek them out in disguise either unless I was training a successor in secret, and did not want the fact to get around. Edna caught on swiftly. But if you want to train someone in secret, you can't just choose anyone, or it will be noticed, and riots will break out over who was selected. Exactly, that cuts out almost all demons. Humans can become powerful, but they don't live long enough to serve as successors, and Angel Flan was a fluke. No other angel would willingly stay in a world inhabited by demons. Even Flan only came at first because she was ordered to. I considered half-breeds, but there aren't many of those, and most of them are more powerful than I want. I was about to scrap the idea when I remembered the bijou sealed into humans. Humans backed by demonic entities, one of these would be perfect. He lifted one, and set it aside. From what the reports say, this one's mind seems to have shattered under the strain of a weaker seal than should have been used. Add that to the fact that the bijou sealed within him wasn't the sanest of the 9 to begin with, and he's useless. He lifted a second, considered it a moment, then sighed, and set it on top of the first. She may actually have worked out well, but by now she's too set in her role, and she wouldn't work anymore. A pity, she seems to have the most control over the demon within her. He picked up the last report, and smiled. This one, the seal on him is slowly destroying the bijou within him, unlike the less powerful seal on the other 2, a seal that apparently required an extremely powerful sacrifice to be performed. Unlike the other 2, this one is almost completely untrained, a definite plus. Almost all of the humans of his village shower him with hatred, unlike the other 2, who were feared to give him even a little attention, and he'll be utterly devoted to me. I'll have to try not to abuse that too much. Laharl smirked, as he stood up, tossing the report back up on the table. Edna, find Flan, and then notify the counselors that I have decided to take a little vacation. Naruto slumped into his bed, staring at the ceiling. Most of the day, it was easy enough to let his mask control his every action, running around like an idiot, and flirting pathetically with Sakura. While people were watching, he had incentive to act normal. But times like this, when he was alone in his ratty apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling, and peeling wallpaper, his mask would slip and crack, revealing his depression. He'd been excited when Iruka had passed him, letting him become a genin, the first step to his dream of becoming Hokage, and then when he'd been put on a team with Sakura, his mask had been overjoyed. Putting up with Sasuke would be a small price to pay, right? But first there was the real genin exam underneath his mask. He'd realized the purpose of the test only a minute after it began, but no one else did. Naturally, when they all failed, it was him, the dead last, that was tied to the log. He'd been lucky that Sasuke had finally figured it out then, but it was likely that Kakashi was grasping at straws to pass the precious Uchiha survivor at that point. Then there had been weeks of pointless D-rank missions for the villagers who had only praise for the Uchiha, and scorn for the demon bearer. Even Kakashi never outright bad-mouthed or scorned Naruto, but he never had anything good to say about him either, while he would throw some praise to Sasuke and Sakura now and again. It was depressing that he seemed to expect them to train on their own, but the shinobi library would never allow him inside. Even if the Sandaime was with him, it only bought him a little time, and he was closely watched, to ensure he got exactly what he came for, and nothing more. Then came their first C-rank mission. Half his pack was occupied with things that didn't fit in Sasuke's spare kunai, and shuriken, and a couple specially made shuriken, as well. The bastard seemed to enjoy idly rubbing Naruto's nose in the fact that no matter how much money he made off the stupid D-ranks, if the villagers decided to pay him at all, none of the more well-respected weapon shops or shinobi supply stores would even allow him entry. Did they think that he wore the same orange jumpsuit every day just because he liked the color orange? His mask was good, But wasn't that a little much? They'd gone through all sorts of hell on that mission, C turned A rank, and all Kakashi had taught them, as a group, was how to climb trees. At first he'd been extremely impressed, but after everything was said and done, a few subtle inquiries from a hinged bunch had revealed that the tree-walking technique had been taught to the other rookies on their first day, as genin. And now, after doing the day's D rank, Kakashi would train them sort of. In reality, he would work heavily with Sasuke, teaching him how to use his eyes, new fire techniques, and polishing his taijutsu while he sent Sakura and Naruto to the other end of the field, to work on stamina and chakra control or something. Sakura had no problem with this, running up and down a tree once or twice before calling it a day before crossing the field to cheer and drool over Sasuke, who would sometimes remove his shirt for the training. Sure, he claimed he didn't want fangirls drooling over him, but he certainly took every opportunity to flaunt himself for them. He grimaced and glanced over at the calendar on his wall, before sighing and returning his gaze to the ceiling. Only a few months until the Chunin exams, he had no doubt that Kakashi would enter them, and the only one of them that might be ready would be Sasuke. That exam was a death trap. Fully prepared genin could wind up dying if they were unfortunate. He and Sakura would have to be extremely lucky to survive it. Naturally, if he, Sakura, or both died, it wouldn't matter at all to Kakashi or Sasuke, only that if they died at the wrong time, it might affect the Uchiha's chances for promotion. Naruto shivered lightly. Was this it? He had done his best to train himself, but it wasn't enough. Nobody would willingly train him, not even Kakashi. If properly trained genin died in that exam, what possible chance did he have of surviving it? Of course, there was always him shaking his head, even as the raspy, growling voice he had grown so familiar with since the incident in Wave. In his rage, he had used the Kyuubi's power, opening up a link between the two that the monster could use to speak directly into his mind. I can help humans for a price. Kill for me, and I will lend you the power to keep yourself alive. Naruto grimaced, focusing on drowning out the voice, burying himself in random thoughts and memories. Human kill for me, spill the blood of these conceited peasants, let it flow freely on the streets. Human kill for me, I can give you power. Naruto clenched his eyes shut, wrapping his hand around the unwrapped hilt of his third-rate kunai. It was sharp, but bore several faults that could cause it to crack when struck, or shatter completely if hit exactly the right way. Human. Naruto's eyes snapped wide open, and the kunai flew from his hand directly towards the intruding voice, as he sat up and stared after it into the shadows. A length of tattered red fabric emerged, deflecting the kunai into a wall, and billowing in place, as a short, blue-haired man in shorts stepped forward. He could feel the demon within him reacting in shock, and recognition, and fear. What could make a demon like Kyuubi know fear? Humans! Kill him! You must kill him! Kill him before he kills us! Kill him now! Naruto ignored him, choosing to stare at the intruder in curiosity instead. In the back of his mind, he considered reverting to his mask, but decided against it. He'd never seen this person before, so it wouldn't matter how he acted anyway, and, it's afraid of you. The intruder slowly arched an eyebrow, and smirked. He speaks to you? Or does he borrow your senses, looking through your eyes, and hearing through your ears? No matter, Kyuubi, leader of the 9 Bijou, you abandoned your post as head of the royal guards during the tumult following the unexpected death of Overlord Krichevsko. In so doing, you were critical in allowing the poisoning of his son, inducing his long sleep. Now I'm ashamed to say that I am willing to allow you your life, but on my terms. Naruto's eyes widened, as a rush of Kyuubi's chakra flooded his body, focusing on his head, and taking control of his mouth and tongue, as his eyes shifted to an evil red. Speak quickly, Laharl-sama. I can only overpower the seal for so long, and my remaining lifespan shortens, as we talk. I have no desire to be lost to oblivion. Heh. So you do know that the seal was specifically designed to kill you slowly. However, I can remove you. Not your power, and a new body will have to be created for you. You'll be knocked down to the most basic of levels, but you'll be alive. I think you should know at the seal's current rate of assimilation, you have perhaps a decade at best before total absorption and oblivion. There was silence, as Kyuubi apparently thought hard about the offer. What do you get out of it? I'm looking for a successor, and need someone that I can train for the post in secret. Your vessel, with most of your power left within him, and sustaining his longevity, he was one of the few people to fit the bill. Now I can still train him with you inside, but you'll still have only a decade to live left before the seal finishes. Or I could just go on to the next on my list. Your call. When the demon spoke through Naruto again, it was almost a plaintive whine. I'll be weak? Yes, but you'll have an entire lifetime to grow powerful again. Fine. Do it. Naruto's eyes widened in horror, as Laharl's hand suddenly lit up in light purple flames, and plunged directly into his stomach, through the seal. The pain was excruciating. He blacked out. Everything was dark and quiet. No, not quiet. He could hear something, a vague muttering, surrounding him. He slowly opened his eyes, staring directly ahead. Crimson eyes stared back. Gwa! Get out of his face, Flan. Ah, sorry, but I was checking to see if he'd healed properly. But I can't see why you would want him. Only a few seconds of pain, and he passed out. Naruto's eyes widened, and he knew that voice. His gaze snapped to where the voice came from, and he nearly fell over at the sight of a tiny, fist-sized fox kiddling with beady, red eyes. Ga so cute. What? No. Not again. First that fallen angel, and now this. Laharl-sama, could you not have made my new body more impressive? Laharl shrugged, as Naruto goggled over Kyubi, the cute, single-tailed ball of fluff. Well, I suppose I could have, but I didn't feel like it. Besides, as you grow more powerful, your body will grow, and become more impressive. A bit of incentive to increase your power levels, Bastard. Naturally. I am a Makai overlord. You should have been more detailed in our bargain if you didn't wish to regret it. You see? You have no one to blame, but yourself. Your fears of oblivion made you far too easy to outsmart. Kyubi didn't even bother to answer, instead turning to the wall, and curling into a small ball of fluff while Laharl smirked at him. It was too much. He slumped back down into his bed. Ah, Laharl-san, he's passed out again. Fix him, love freak. Oh? Right. Heal. Naruto's eyes snapped back open, as the soft green light sank into him. He glanced around his room. Yep, still there. Tiny fuzzball, weird blonde, and the guy with the creepy cape. You're still here, why? Laharl arched an eyebrow. Oh? Didn't you hear when I was negotiating with your inner demon? I had considered preparing a long speech to sway you, but what would be the point? It's a simple fact that the humans in this village despise you. They simply will not allow you to gain power. The little you can gain will have to be snatched in small bits and pieces. I've watched you for the last 24 hours, so I know it's true. I would dare say the people in charge of selecting who you're teamed with placed you on your current squad specifically because your sensei would only give you the barest minimum of training, and that only when absolutely necessary. I, however, have found myself in need of a student to train. With Kyubi's power locked within you, and with his disruptive influence removed, you fit the bill perfectly. Flan blinked. Ah, Laharl-san? I thought you said you weren't going to give a long speech? Laharl slammed his fist into the top of her head, sending her directly to the ground. Don't contradict me. Now then, will you accept? Or should I take my offer elsewhere, and leave you to your own devices? Naruto glanced down to the dazed Flan, then to the ball of fluff that had apparently drifted off into a nap, and then slowly his gaze drifted off to the calendar, still hanging on the wall, still counting the days until. What do you get out of this? I'm not stupid enough to believe that you're only here to help me. You're a demon. Rather than being offended, Laharl's smirk merely grew broader. Exactly. But the thing is, for once I'm being brutally honest. You see, I'm not just any demon, I'm a Makai overlord. Surprisingly, once the populace stops trying to rebel against you, the job is rather dull. I'm only going to train you, as a form of entertainment, to see if you actually can make it, as my successor. Don't get me wrong though. Should you accept, I intend to train you to the best of my ability, though you may find the training grueling. Torturous even. There was a glint in Laharl's eyes, as though he was looking forward to showing him just how torturous his training could be. Even so, Naruto's eyes strayed once more to the calendar. That death trap of an exam was still only a couple of months away. Could he learn enough to keep himself alive on his own? All he had on his side was a single clone technique, and he could stick to trees. He could replace himself with a log, and he could hang out with a naked girl. He had to face it. This opportunity was a godsend, despite who it came from. His eyes flickered into a stony resolve, and he nodded curtly. Do you agree? Excellent. Now for the preparations, but before we begin, you must understand that I am not training you as a ninja. I am training you as my successor. That involves far more than just physical abilities. You'll find out soon enough. For the moment to undertake my training, you'll need to be far better in tune with the demonic energies flowing through you. He prodded Flan with his foot, and she was instantly up and alert again. That seal would make things difficult, but I can modify it easily. Change one little mark, and rather than dividing the energies, and allowing a small amount to spurt through now and again, it will forcefully merge the two energies, changing your body here and there, as necessary to accommodate the new power. If Kyubi had still been within you, your mind would have been completely erased, leaving an opening for him to inhabit, but his lifespan would have remained the same. Now it will be the most painful experience you could possibly imagine. The very cells of your body will be tearing themselves to shreds, reforming themselves, and then tearing themselves apart again. But don't worry, Flan here is the best healer in my entire Makai, and she'll be on hand to make sure the pain doesn't kill you or drive you mad. Now lie back down, and hold still. Naruto was sweating heavily, as Kyubi-chan turned around, and began watching intently. Mare, I think I've changed my mind. Too late. Naruto's world was painful. After his change of heart was brutally, and immediately denied, he had leapt for the window, but Laharl's creepy cape had caught him around the ankle, and slammed him into the floor before dropping him in his bed. The impact stunned him momentarily, leaving an opening for Laharl to surround his hand with the purple energy again, and slam it directly onto the seal, which flared bright red, as he poured out massive waves of power to affect the seal. Nearby shinobi would narrow their eyes at the brief wave of anxiety and nervousness that suddenly rushed over them, but within the hour they'd all completely forgotten about it, or decided to ignore it. After all, there had been no apparent attack, and they hadn't sensed any chakra, so it probably wasn't important, right? Just a symptom of stress, and a too large workload. Meanwhile, Naruto was thrashing in agony. He opened his mouth to scream, but Laharl, acting quickly, stuffed a wadded-up cloth into his open mouth, muffling his cries of pain. After the first few minutes, he began to wonder if it would be easier to just die, and get it over with. But every time his thrashes would weaken, or his eyes would begin to glaze, Flan's green magic would seep into his body, and return him to his agony. A long time later, an eternity of pain compressed into a few short hours, his spasms slowed lessened, and he drifted off into an exhausted slumber. Laharl nodded, and scribbled something onto a scrap of paper, and Flan cast a few spells to scan and see if there had been any complications that needed to be fixed. Kyubi-chan just looked disappointed that the torture hadn't lasted longer. Laharl-san? Was this really necessary? Laharl blinked at Flan's unexpected question, then shrugged. Not really, but it makes things easier for me. Anyway, have Etna's printies finished? This shabby apartment doesn't fit my needs at all, and Naruto-kun needs to learn the privileges of his new rank. Oh, I think they're done. Or they should be. Etna bought the plot of land this morning, just inside the village walls, but somewhat secluded, and the printies are hard workers, so. Laharl shrugged, and pinned his hastily scribbled note on the wall, directly in front of the door where it couldn't possibly be missed. Take him there then. What? Carry him? What did you expect? You are the servant, remember? Laharl-san is so mean. Despite her protests, Flan easily lifted Naruto, and stretched out her wings, flapping carefully through the darkness over Konoha. Laharl turned to Kyubi-chan. So how long do you intend to remain here? In my weakened state. I don't intend to stick around this village, or even this country for very long. The humans here make a habit of catching every fox they see anywhere near their village, and cutting them into little pieces. Apparently they view it as vengeance of a sort for when I attack their village. Normally I would be amused at the human foolishness, but in my current state after I've left this country, I'll gather my strength, and open a small gate to this world's Makai. As far as I can tell, the inhabitants are much weaker than normal. They're a perfect place for me to raise my strength a little. Once I've got a decent amount of power back, I'm not sure. Things could become problematic if certain of my acquaintances get wind of my reincarnation. Some of them were troublesome to deal with even before I'd come to this world. Thinking of facing them now, I haven't felt fear for millennia, but that thought makes cold chills run down my spine. I think I shall take a new name, and not let anyone realize that I am a reincarnation rather than a first incarnation. Perhaps I'll even seal away. Kyubi-chan fell silent for a while, as Laharl glanced out the window, looking at the stars. A good plan, but I would make a few failsafes. As well, there was an incident I was involved in. A few centuries ago, a powerful overlord named Xenon had a similar problem. Only her Makai was filled with demons that were extremely stubborn, and were in an almost constant state of rebellion. She got sick of the constant battle, and left to a faraway human world to reincarnate herself, and lock away her memories. Unfortunately, one of her more stubborn enemies followed her, and took advantage of the situation. Long story short, things turned into a complete mess that ended up being mostly fixed by the intervention of an extremely young, but very powerful demon, one who had been raised as, and honestly believed himself to be a human. Things came to a head when they faced off against the usurper, who had even stolen her previous name, Xenon, and they were put into dire enough and familiar enough straits that her sealed-up memories shattered through the mental barrier long enough to completely destroy him, and things seemed to be fine. But only a few short years later, the weakened mental barrier completely broke, and she slipped into madness, her sealed memories warring with her new persona. People around her noticed she was acting strangely, but thought nothing of it. After all, she had just become pregnant with her husband's first child. The demon, who believed himself human, mood swings and odd behavior were to be expected, natural even. Then people began disappearing. Just one or two here and there. One or two people here and there who'd strayed out past the town fields for whatever reason. A couple at one point, who'd gone into a forest to be alone. Their bodies would turn up, days after they'd disappeared, maimed, and mutilated to the point where they were barely recognizable. At first, the humans thought it was some rabid beast, and sent hunters to track it. When the hunters died, they decided it must be a powerful demon, left over from the false Xenon fiasco, and sent the human demon, Adele, who had become something of a hero, to hunt it down. He spent weeks searching until his adoptive brother, who claimed himself as the now mad woman's servant, as his own preference, began to put the clues together. She was always missing when the disappearances occurred, and when she returned, little things would be out of place. Her hair would be mussed up, or there would be a small streak of blood on her clothes or on her hands, odd in itself. As when she fought, she used a distance weapon. He confronted her, just as Adele came back from his failed hunt. He was back just in time to watch, as his beloved wife brutally maimed and murdered his adoptive brother. He immediately sent people, mercenaries he'd hired years ago, and kept in touch with to chase her down and capture her. I myself went with them, along with 2 of my own vassals, and we brought her back in chains. The humans were in a state of shock. They had known, and liked Xenon's reincarnation. This was completely unexpected to them. They locked her away, and hired the best mental healers money could afford for her, but nothing worked. Eventually, they came to the sad conclusion that, like a mad dog, she had to be put down. After a lengthy argument, Adele broke down, and agreed with 2 stipulations. The first, that they would wait a few months, for her child to be born, and to see if she'd snap out of it on her own. The second was that he was the one to end her life. I attended the execution ceremony. It was one of the saddest events I have ever experienced. She had given birth only hours before, and was still pale, and exhausted from the experience, but it didn't stop her from frothing lightly at the mouth, and making occasional weak lunges at the people around her. The only one she wouldn't try to attack was Adele, and he knew it, and it only made it harder for him. To his credit, he didn't break down until after he'd done what was necessary, and nobody begrudged him his tears. He stuck around for 15 years after that, long enough to make sure his baby daughter could take care of herself, using both her fists, and the weapons her mother had used. And then, Laharl paused. I'm not actually sure what happened then. He simply disappeared. Maybe he left, because he couldn't make himself stay any longer. Maybe he joined his wife in death. I don't know, and I was never told. I'm also not sure why I've told you all this. I'm not usually so long-winded, forgive me. He turned towards Kyubi-chan, who'd curled up into a ball, and began to snore. His eye began twitching, as a vessel popped out on his forehead. Bakakaya, do you have any idea just how rude it is to fall asleep while someone's telling a story? Faye, just for that, I'm leaving you there. And you can only hope you're gone by the time Naruto's ninja sensei comes around to find out why his student didn't show up tomorrow morning. Laharl turned, and hopped out the still open window, his cape forming itself into wings, as he floated away. Once he had been gone for several minutes, Kyubi-chan cracked an eye open, and then sat up. I suppose his story had a point. I'll have to think more about this before I leave for Makai. The chances of such an occurrence, as he described, are low, but still well within the realms of possibility. Perhaps a change of plan is in order, but this is no place to sit and think. I may be more than a match for some of the weaker humans, but the more powerful ones could eradicate me easily for now. Kakashi flipped a page in his orange book, and glanced down from his perch to the bridge where his team was waiting for him. Then he glanced at his watch. This was odd, a minute left until 6, the time he'd left orders for them all to be here. Naruto should be here any second, and then he could go, and take a walk around town for a few hours, and show up just before their patience gave out, and they left, as usual. The odd thing was, Naruto was usually here half an hour before the stated time. Maybe he'd slept in. He did do that now, and again, but even so, he was always here within a few seconds of being late. He glanced down the path with no sign of the cloud of kicked-up dust or panicked birds that would signal Naruto's panicked rush to the Team 7 meeting place. Maybe he was sick. Kakashi's eyes closed and thought he could not once recall a time where Naruto had caught anything worse off than a mild case of the sniffles. His inhabitant had seen to that. Perhaps he'd stayed up all night training? He'd done that in Wave. But Kakashi found it unlikely that anyone in Konoha would be willing to explain how to perform a technique to the bearer of Kyubi. It was possible, though, that he managed to get his hands on a scroll. Every so often, someone would throw a scroll of techniques away, if they were low-level or unimportant enough to take the safer route of burning them. It was also possible that Naruto had bought a scroll from someone of his generation, or from a newcomer to the village. He set his book back into the shuriken pouch, and poofed away in a swirl of leaves. If Naruto had come into possession of a scroll, then it was his duty, as Naruto's sensei, to take a look at it, and confiscate it should he decide it was beyond his current abilities, and he doubted that the idiot had picked up something he was actually capable of. He kept trying to match himself up to Sasuke, ignoring the fact that Sasuke was from a privileged clan, and that he couldn't have matched him even before he'd awakened his Sharingan. The dead last was just going to hurt himself. A swirl of leaves, and he was in the hallway next to Naruto's apartment. He lifted his hand to knock, but paused, and listened for any activity inside. Nothing. He tapped gently on the door with no reply. Sleeping in? He knocked harder, then sighed, as he remained unanswered. Naruto? Are you in there? I'm coming in if you're changing or something, let me know. Still no answer. Kakashi shrugged, and reached down to unlock the door, and it opened easily. Now his visible eye narrowed in suspicion. As unliked as he was, Naruto was a powerful asset to their village, with the Kyuubi sealed inside of him. If he could learn to consciously control the kind of power he displayed in Wave, he could become a force beyond reckoning. That was the main reason he had decided to slack off on training him. If he became frustrated enough, he would turn once again to that power. It was only a matter of time. But if someone had kidnapped Naruto, while almost nobody would really be upset at first, there could be disastrous consequences if an enemy got their hands on Kyuubi's power. He threw the door open, and then blinked, as he noted the scrap of paper pinned to the wall. He tore it off, and scanned it, relaxing midway through, with relief flooding off of him in waves, as he read the terrible handwriting on the note, instantly recognizable as Naruto's. Oh, changing apartments, I feel kinda dumb. Nobody can learn of this. He left an address. Well, I suppose that he is earning enough for a better apartment now. Whatever, he could have had the decency to let me know beforehand though. He shrugged, and left, pocketing the note. He had several hours of reading before he had to meet up with his little geniuses, and train Sasuke. Sakura really didn't register in his mind at all, as he considered her as little more than a cheerleader to spur Sasuke on. Sasuke had begun twitching in horror after the first hour. It had become apparent. The dove had abandoned him. After he'd been assigned to the same team as one of his most rabid fangirls, he'd come to rely on the dove to run interference for him to distract the evil pink-haired witch that simply would not leave him alone. Whether he realized it or not, the dove tended to show up at exactly the right time to deflect the majority of her attention. Today he had simply never shown. That done, if he was ill, he had better be in agonizing pain, or Sasuke was going to kill him. Sakura cuddled into his side, grinning, as she mistook his shudder of distaste for one of repressed desire. It wasn't that he didn't like girls, he just preferred them a little more well-developed. The only thing Sakura had going for her was an unnatural hair color, one that was apparently passed down through the dominant genes. Before he had learned that interesting tidbit, he'd actually considered cutting some sort of deal with her for a one-night stand, sometime in the future, in exchange for leaving him alone unless she conceived. However, the mere thought of pink-haired Uchiha girls, or worse, pink-haired Uchiha boys, convinced him to banish the idea to the depths of oblivion. However, the more he snubbed her, the tighter she held onto him, desperately deluding herself into the idea that Sasuke was just playing hard to get. He glanced around feverishly, as Sakura's arms looped around his waist, hoping against hope that the dove would show up and do something stupid, prompting a beatdown from the emotional girl. Instead, Kakashi showed up. Well, beggars can't be choosers, Kakashi-sensei. He spoke loud and clear, keeping his face in the careful expressionless mask that translated to him wanting to break down crying in gratitude for someone finally showing up to rescue him from his torment. Sakura meeped, and sprang away from him, flushing as heavily as if they'd been caught in the middle of some raunchy action. Had things actually progressed that far, Sasuke may have just taken after certain wild animals caught in traps, and gnawed off his own arm to escape. Yo! Sasuke's eye twitched at the casual way he said that, and then leaned up against the railing to continue reading his book. Where's the dobe, Kakashi-sensei? It isn't like him to be so late. Apparently, he's decided to move out of his apartment. I have his new address here somewhere. Sasuke's eyes widened slightly, and Sakura flat out gaped in shock, as Kakashi removed things from his pockets, a handful of shuriken, and scraps of jagged metal that Sasuke recognized as caltrops, as well as a scroll to begin with. But then things got odd. A rubber chicken? Why would he be carrying something like that? Or a half-eaten lollipop? Or a green jumpsuit? Or a tiny sequin thong? Sasuke's brain shut down, and Sakura flushed heavily. By the time Sasuke was capable of thinking again, Kakashi was holding a crumpled sheet of paper and stuffing his things back into his pockets. Sasuke flinched at the flash of sequins. He could have lived a long, content life without seeing that. Here it is. I take it you'd rather go take a look than do today's mission? I suppose you've earned a day off, and I'm rather curious about this address. Follow me. After a few minutes of walking, Sasuke had to admit that he was mildly curious, as well. This was the district where most of the training grounds were located, As far as he understood, that would drop the real estate prices somewhat. But would anyone build an apartment complex there really? He would think that the possibility of a wayward destroying the building would make housing in the area unfeasible at the least, but, as they continued walking, they came to a wooded area with targets hung on the trees for shuriken practice, and then a bit further they all stopped, leaving a small area of unused forest, and a path leading to the center. Kakashi glanced at the bit of paper again, then shrugged, and started down the small path, his 2 genin trailing behind him. The walk was short, but oddly enough, the woods seemed to turn spooky the second they started down the path. The sun was still shining overhead, but it seemed dimmed somehow. The trees were darker, many seemed like they were dying, and they were filled with the staring eyes of crows. Every so often, Sasuke or Sakura would get the feeling that someone was staring at them, but when they whirled to look, no one was there. Kakashi got this feeling every so often, as well, but ignored it. He felt no serious chakra signatures, so while the effect was somewhat disturbing, there was no real danger. They turned a small corner, and the entire team took a moment to stare at the building that was revealed. It was much larger than they'd expected, and yet it was in a state of obvious disrepair, the wood aged and gnarled, shingles falling off, and some of the windows were broken, covered with ragged curtains. 2 creatures carved out of stone stood beside the front door, giving the eerie feeling that they were guarding it from unwelcome guests. As Kakashi knocked at the door, Sasuke stepped closer to one, examining it. He'd never seen anything like it. It was like a cross between a large dog, cat, and bird, standing on its hind legs, claws bared. He locked eyes with it. The stone eye swiveled to stare right back at him. Sasuke let loose a strangled gasp, as he stumbled backwards, drawing Sakura's attention before he could mask his shock. "Sasuke-kun? Is something wrong?" Sasuke stared at the statue, and it was once again staring blankly forward. He stood up, and slowly set his hand on the cold stone lifeless. "It was nothing, Sakura. I just thought no, it was nothing." Even so, as the door slowly creaked open, Sasuke's eyes were locked on the immobile statue, not noticing that its counterpart had turned its head to stare at him. As he followed Kakashi and Sakura into the mansion, Kakashi glanced curiously around the entryway. The walls and floor were made out of a very dark wood, varnished almost to a mirror coat, and a small, tarnished chandelier hung from the ceiling to give light. The interesting thing, though, was the puppets. 4 of them, crafted out of wood and straw with matching motley clothes, suited for a jester at a costume party. 2 black buttons were placed, as eyes, and the mouth was a stitched line. He shrugged, putting it up to an eccentric owner, but Sakura couldn't help but take a closer look at the tacky decorations. They were hideous, badly made, with straw poking out here and there, and none of the limbs were quite the right length. And did that one just smirk at her? She looked again. Yes, it was definitely smirking, and, as she watched, it began to turn its head slowly, further and further, until it had made a full circle, and its false eyes were staring at her again. Yeah. Kakashi blinked, as he turned to where Sakura had screamed, and fell flat on her back. Sakura-chan? It moved! The puppet, it moved! Kakashi paused, then stepped closer to examine the puppet. After a moment he shook his head, and stepped back. Sakura-chan, it's just a puppet. If someone was controlling it with chakra strings, then it might be dangerous enough to scream about. But I don't detect even the faintest hint of chakra in it. It can't have moved. Sasuke glared at the puppet, as Sakura goggled at Kakashi. Something very odd was going on in this house, but I saw it moved. Now, Sakura-chan, it's only a puppet. She shivered, and darted over to cling to one of Sasuke's arms, prompting a small vein to spring up on his forehead. Pardon me. Their gaze swung to the inner door, now framing a blonde girl with a red hair ribbon wearing something made out of white fabric over what appeared to be a red one-piece swimsuit. Laharl-san will see you now. You're expected. Follow me. Kakashi shrugged, and followed the girl, Sakura relinquishing her grip on Sasuke when he seemed unwilling to immediately follow their sensei. Sasuke continued to stare at the puppet for a moment, then turned, and paced after the group. Behind him, the puppet was waiting at his back. Kakashi was slightly confused. This house was a maze of random hallways and staircases, with strange decorations. One of those puppets from earlier here, a suit of armor unlike anything he'd ever seen there, paintings of places and creatures he'd never seen adorn the walls. He revised his opinion. The owner of this building was extremely eccentric. Also, the girl leading them around didn't know whether or not his genin had noticed, but her irises were red. An uncommon color to say the least. The only person he knew with naturally red eyes was Kurenai, and that was a genetic trait. Even so, he felt no trace of the large chakra reserves that would indicate a trained ninja, but red eyes was something more worth noticing than letting your imagination run wild with you, and deciding inanimate objects were moving on their own. Ridiculous nonsense. Behind them, A suit of armor slowly raised its gauntlet, and flipped Kakashi off. After an indeterminable amount of time walking, the girl paused, and tapped lightly at a door. How she could tell which one she wanted was beyond him. After a moment of waiting, she eased the door open, and held it for them to walk through. Inside the room, a young man in a tattered cape was sitting down to a meal, but what caught Kakashi's attention was the furniture. The table was a circular slab of stone, being held up by 4 blue things resembling penguins somewhat, but with peg legs and bat wings. Another of the odd statues was set beside the man's chair, holding a silvery tray of drinks. The man calmly finished his plate full of food, ignoring them, and the 2 younger members' growling stomachs. As he set down his silverware, he lifted a small crystal goblet, and sipped at it, as he turned to look at the ninjas. So I assume you're here about Naruto? Flan, fetch him. As for you, feel free to leave. I'll send him along to you once he's eaten. Kakashi broke in. Actually, I've given them the day off to come look at Naruto's new apartment. Laharl blinked, then shrugged, and took another sip of his drink. Whatever. You can wait here for him then. A long silence fell, as Laharl shoveled some more food on his plate, and began eating again. A slow sweat drop formed on Kakashi's head, as all 3 stomachs began rumbling. You're not going to invite us to join you, are you? It was a statement, not a question, but Laharl nodded in agreement anyway, prompting a twitching eye from Sasuke. Sakura, however, voiced her complaints out loud. But why? We haven't eaten since dawn, and we had to stand for hours on a bridge, in the wind, and then we came here, and didn't pass any place to eat on the way. And this place is creepy, and I'm hungry, and... She slumped for a moment, and then reverted to the most effective weapon she had against the male species' puppy dog eyes. Please? Just a plateful? No. But, the food here is only for people who live here. If you don't live here, you can't eat here. That's simple. Kakashi gave a glance at the food, and it actually looked really good, really good. And, as it happened, he hadn't eaten since his early breakfast either, and he was actually rather hungry. Maybe he could fight this Laharl guy for it. He mentally slapped himself. The Hokage would definitely not look kindly upon him beating up a civilian for their food, and he could tell by chakra levels that this was no ninja. He wasn't even at the level of a basic academy student. That left one option. How much is rent here then? I've been considering changing apartments for a while. It could come in handy to live in the same place as one of my students. Laharl blinked, and turned to him. 15,000 Rio. A month? A bit pricey, but still reasonable. You misunderstand, my rate is 15,000 a night. The genin's eyes widened in shock, and Kakashi nearly fell over, as he tried to compute that in his head. What? Long story short, I received a ridiculously large sum in an inheritance, but could not claim it unless I was running some form of business, but I hate work. So I charge impossible rates, nobody stays, and I still get my money. Legally, though it never stated whether or not the business had to be successful. But then how can Naruto afford to live here if your rates are so unreasonable? That funny story actually. I was at this party, and some of us were playing poker in a side room. The thing is, one of the players left early, and we needed a 4th. The other 2 guys went on, and on about just who they should bring in. So eventually I just got fed up with it, stepped out of the building for a moment, and dragged the first person I saw back in. After explaining the game, he actually did rather well for a beginner. He won some hands, lost some, and won one particularly big hand that included free room, and board here, forever. I happened to be somewhat inebriated when I offered that up for stakes. Even so, he's only one person, so I figured it wouldn't hurt to pay up. The few people that could afford to stay here often find the decor distasteful, and decline to stay for more than a night at most. Kakashi stared obviously at the penguin things, one of whom he could almost swear had just moved slightly. I can't imagine why. Conversation, such as it was, ground to a halt, as the flan girl opened up the door to the hallway again, and a haggard-looking, bedraggled Naruto stumbled slowly through. Their gaze was captured by him instantly. Even when he'd worn himself to the bone in waves, he hadn't looked so terrible. His stumbling was weak, and he nearly tripped twice, and when he finally made it to his chair it was more a matter of draping himself limply over it rather than sitting down. He seemed ready to pass out right there at the table. Tut, lightweight. But to be fair, I suppose you may not have realized those little drinks you sucked down so fast were highly alcoholic. Ooh. He turned his head slightly, and opened one bleary eye. Kakashi-sensei? Kill me and my torment. Get over it. It's just a little hangover. You'll get over it. Eat a little, drink something. You'll survive. Ugh, my world has been redefined. As living pain, where are we? You won living quarters here last night, remember? Or actually you might not have memory problems after drinking, as much as you did. Naruto's brow crinkled, as he searched his memory, flinching now, and again, as a jolt of pain ran through his head. Oh yeah, the card game. I don't feel so good. Naruto's eyes closed, and he slumped slightly heavier in his chair. Laharl sent a curious glance his way. Passed out. Ah well, I'll just leave some here for him when he wakes up. Now then, Flan, show our visitors to the door. The girl seems terribly famished, and it would be rude to keep them from seeking a meal somewhere. This prompted a clenched fist and swollen vein from said girl, as she contemplated on if it was so rude, then why hadn't he let them eat some of his food? Nonetheless, they all quietly left, and made it to the door far faster than it had taken them to make their way to the dining room for some reason. As they left, Sasuke paused, and turned to stare at the statues framing the door, where they were lying down, curled up in a facsimile of sleep. But didn't they? He shook his head and left. Stupid dope, if he had won a free room in that creepy building, he would have turned it down. But then again, he owned the entire Uchiha sector. It wasn't like he was hurting for real estate. As he disappeared around the bend in the path, Laharl's face could be seen in one of the windows smirking. Baka Ninjen is so easily fooled. Kakashi glanced back at his genin, and sighed. While he really wanted to just go report Naruto's change of address to the third, and then go home to eat something, and maybe read his book some more, but he couldn't in good conscience leave those two to flounder about on their own, especially since he got the feeling that Sasuke was going to end up killing someone if he didn't find an opportunity to get away from Sakura-chan's loving embraces. Kakashi sighed, and glanced around until he found a restaurant, and began pacing determinedly toward it. Sushi, anyone? My treat. Laharl continued to stare out the window until he was sure that the humans had no intentions of returning. Then he twitched the curtain shut, and glared at the slumped form of Naruto. One of his eyes opened, and stared back at him, prompting a smirk. Good job, Naruto. The humans were completely fooled. Naruto frowned, as he sat up straighter, and began placing food on his plate. Another Prinny slowly walked out from a side room, holding a tray of drinks for him the same way one held them for Laharl. He took a sip from a silver chalice before returning his attention to the food. It wasn't that much of an act. I simply allowed myself to show the lingering pain from last night. By the way, the seal is gone. Was that supposed to happen? Laharl shrugged. It had served its purpose at that point. It was just an unnecessary, superfluous marking, and it dissipated on its own. Nothing to worry about. Naruto paused eating for a moment to consider that, then shrugged, and went back to his meal with gusto. I really don't care. I was just wondering whether or not I should tell the old man about it or something. But if it's not important, then it doesn't matter. Laharl shrugged, and knocked back the rest of his drink before setting it on the Prinny's tray. Finish up quickly, but leave enough for Flan and Etna. That Kakashi person may be giving you the day off, but I have many things for you to do. If you are to be my successor, you must learn, and learn quickly. Naruto's eyes widened, and suddenly his plate was emptied, and his drink was gone. Yes. Training. Let's go. Laharl arched an eyebrow, and then shrugged before turning to a Prinny. When Etna wakes up, let her know I have another job for her. Understood? Laharl's grin simply oozed malice, and the Prinny began sweating heavily, understanding perfectly what would happen if it should mess up. Laharl nodded, and left the room, Naruto trailing directly after him. Are we there yet? Laharl suppressed a twitch. This was the third time he'd said that, and he was almost to the point of, are we there yet? Laharl's cape suddenly shot out, wrapping itself around Naruto's throat, and lifting him off the ground. As he gagged, and clutched at the fabric, Laharl turned to glare at him. Lesson 1: Pissing off people who can kill you without moving or even thinking heavily about it is generally considered a bad idea. Work, I get it, let go please? The cape loosened, and returned to its previous position, as Laharl continued down the hall, leaving Naruto collapsed on the ground, clutching his throat, as he gasped for breath. 3 doors down, Laharl paused. Now we are there. After a minute or so of massaging his bruised throat, Naruto stood up, and followed Laharl into the room. A very odd room indeed, unlike the other rooms, where the decoration was mostly alive, possessed, or a combination of both. The statues in this room seemed to be just that, with large basins at the base. Laharl stepped up to one, and reached into the basin, pulling out a catalog? How odd. Stupid innovations, Laharl muttered under his breath. I preferred it when it was real people at the shops, people I could intimidate into better prices. Let's see something that doesn't look too out of place, that actually limits it severely. 1 Hellstrike set of battle gloves, 1 Sesshomaru katana, 1 Elder Spear, 1 Master Bow, 1 Crisis Brand Sidearm, 1 Master Axe, and 1 Oracle Staff. Then from you I need a Reflex Pendant, a Hero's Mantle, and a Royal Ring. And from you a few sticks of gum, I guess. The eyes on the statues flared, and the 3 basins filled with the requested items, as an empty voice echoed around the room. Thank you for shopping at this outpost of the Rosen Queen Company. The expense of your purchases has been deducted from your account, Laharl-sama. Yeah, he muttered, scooping the weapons and magic armor out of the basins with his cape. God, I hate these stupid things. Whose bright idea were they anyway? Progress my anyway. Pick the weapon you want to train with first, then put on the ring, pendant, and mantle. The mantle's black, so that should help when you go do ninja things, and if I feel like it I might teach you to use it like my cape. Naruto quickly put the accessories on, but paused at the weapons. I'd advise you start with the gloves, because the techniques you can learn with them can be used barehanded, as well, although they won't have the sheer force behind them that they will with the gloves on. Really? Naruto shrugged, and pulled the gloves on, then spent a moment admiring them. They were black leather maybe? With red runes running almost unnoticed along the seams. Above the knuckles, there were 4 small metallic spikes. Getting hit by these would hurt, even if it would heal quick enough. He paused, as a thought struck him. With Kyuubi gone, would he still have his impressive regeneration rate? If not, his thoughts broke off, as Laharl grabbed his arm, and dropped a stick of gum on the outstretched platter of one of the other 3 statues in the room. Reality bent around them. Naruto gasped, and stumbled onto the ground, before glancing at his surroundings in shock. Instead of the statue-filled room that they had just been in, they were suddenly standing on a floating island of stone. Not far away, creatures began to slowly turn towards them. For the moment, they were content to stare, as though they had not yet fully registered their arrival. What the hell are we? This is the item world. Naruto turned to Laharl, who had taken a lecturing tone. In this place, those beings don't really exist. Just like we aren't really here. In this place, reality is one big illusion. This place was invented, discovered whatever word you wish to use, by a powerful demon who regretted that weapons and armor could only be made so powerful, or so light. But he recognized that everything created has multitudes of tiny imperfections, and this place is where those imperfections take on a form of life all their own. You can see them over there. They have taken the form of extremely low-level demons. Kill one, and the imperfection it relates to will disappear. Becoming perfect, the item will become permanently lighter, or harder, or sharper. Very useful. Most items have 30 stages, like this one, fraught with imperfections. Some items, rarer than normal, have a slowly pulsing blue gem attached to them. Somehow the gem makes the item more powerful than normal to begin with, and also adds a great many more imperfections. Those items have 60 stages, and some, extremely rarely, have a swiftly pulsing yellow gem attached. Those are even more powerful than the blue gems, and add more imperfections, to a grand total of 100 stages. Those items can become incredibly powerful, but are difficult to find. There is a way, but I'll teach you that later. He shrugged, and reached back to massage his neck, as the imperfection demons began to grow shifty and restless. Anyway, time doesn't pass here. We can go through a full 100 stages all at once, and be back in the real world the same second we left. Useful for training, don't you think? In any case, we demons train differently than humans. I'll still be teaching you fighting styles, but combination strikes and special techniques will come from your weapon. As you kill things with it, and learn to use it better, it will transfer information directly to your brain, teaching you without teaching you, so to speak. There's all sorts of things that can't be learned this way though, and you can create your own techniques that nobody else can learn except directly from you. But a good rule of thumb is that the more you kill, the faster your power grows. Naruto looked slightly anxious. Is it necessary to kill? Couldn't I just knock someone out? Laharl sneered before answering. When you're playing with your human friends, feel free to just knock them out. I'd not use the special techniques you'll learn here, though those tend to cut an extremely fine line between knocked out and stone cold dead. But if it eases your conscience, then just remember that your opponents here aren't real. And even if they were, they wouldn't hesitate to kill you. Most lower level demons are like that really, unless they are in direct service to a more powerful demon. Then, they'll wait for the order to kill you. Besides, for now, you are still a ninja in service to your human village. Sooner or later, they will ask you to kill for them. Did you not understand that when you signed on? Or did you begin training too young to comprehend anything other than ninjas are cool? Naruto flinched. Laharl had a point. The academy took children in young, and then very carefully skirted around the facts of just what a shinobi does long enough for them to decide that they couldn't imagine being anything else, and had based all their long-term plans around the profession. Laharl turned, and grinned that the imperfections had begun a sluggish charge. The thing is, despite the fact that this place doesn't exist, and you aren't really here, every wound you take is real. If you die here, tough luck. Here they come, I'll deal with the ones that decide to attack me. But aside from that, you're on your own. Have fun, and try not to die. Naruto flinched, and paled momentarily, then clenched his fists, as his eyes snapped up to the angry demons, now only a few feet away from him. He dashed forward, arms up to strike. Laharl smirked, ever so slightly impressed with the brat. He was fighting savagely, and Laharl could almost see the demonic runes on his gloves improving his technique. As he fought each strike a little harder, a little faster, every motion a little smoother than the last, he willed himself to see into, and beyond the boy, confirming what he saw on a more physical level. The boy was extremely talented in hand-to-hand combat, easily S rank. He would prove to be no slouch with other weapons either, A-, and B ranked with the rest, except for guns, which was a surprisingly low D rank. No matter, the rankings only showed how fast you would improve with the weapon. With a bit of work, he could be just as good with a gun as he was with any other weapon. It would only take longer. His smirk broadened at the distinctive flash of those tiny runes. As the boy killed the last imperfection, he just learned his first special move now to see just how disappointed with it he was. Because if he remembered correctly, it was, "What the hell? I busted my chops for a measly 3-hit combo." Laharl's smirk threatened to take off the top of his head, as the island faded and swirled, only to be replaced with another. And on to stage 2, and stage 3. Oh, did I forget to mention the imperfection manifestations grow more powerful with every stage? What? Stage 7. Surely you aren't getting tired already? Shut up. Stage 9. You're looking a little tired. Don't worry, after the next stage there should be a place where we can stop and rest. But the next stage will have a boss, probably half again, as powerful as the rest. Hey Q. And after the 10th stage, and the boss, Naruto all but collapsed on the ground, sweating heavily. Laharl glanced around, noting the emptiness of the stage, and shrugged, before turning to his exhausted pupil, and sweat dropping heavily. Let's get you to the flower girl, she'll fix you." Despite his state of exhaustion, Naruto was aware that the flower girl wasn't a girl selling flowers, like he'd expected at first, but a green girl that was actually growing out of a large flower. Odd, but no odder than some of the other things that had happened since he accepted Laharl's offer. He groaned in relief, as the girl held out her hands, and green waves of energy wafted through him, healing, revitalizing, and re-energizing him completely. He'd been pleased to learn that he still regenerated damage, if not as fast as he was accustomed to. But, as damage built up, it became more difficult to heal. He guessed that it would have been the same with QB, but it would have taken much longer. He stood up and stretched, smiling in gratitude at the flower chick. She flushed lightly in response, which might have disturbed him had he not already turned away. He felt stronger. He'd always felt slightly stronger after he'd trained himself, but this was unreal. He had already improved at least 10 times what he would if he'd fought that many of his Kage Bunshin, and it was actually rather even. His Bunshin could only take 1 hit before dispelling, but most of the things he just killed only stood up to 1 solid hit, as well. Also, his triple strike combo was puny, but the Tiger Charge special attack was much more impressive, and damaging, and difficult to dodge. While Naruto was musing over his newfound techniques, Laharl stared at the item world medic. She would stare at Naruto's back for a moment, then flush again, and look at the ground, poking her fingers together, before lifting her gaze to stare at him again. How odd when a manifestation in this place required a personality. It would copy one from the memories of one of the people visiting, as he knew that he didn't know anyone who acted like that, not anyone who was still alive anyway. That left someone the boy knew, or at least had met. How amusing there was a human somewhere crushing on his protege. He shrugged, and signaled the ghost nearby, who nodded, and the resting area faded, revealing the next stage. Hours later, and yet in no time at all, reality swirled one last time, and spat the two back out in the statue room. Laharl indicated the statue of a priestess with outstretched hands, and then lifted the stick of gum from the stone platter, and popped it in his mouth, as his pupil crawled towards healing. These always taste so much better after they've been perfected. Naruto gasped in pain, as he finally flopped himself beneath the stone hands, and lay motionless, as soft waves of healing green light descended on him. Then he stood, and glared at Laharl. "What the hell? I went through all that, just so you could have a better stick of gum? You must be joking with me." "Oh? Well, I wouldn't say only after all, you got a decent amount of training in, as well, didn't you?" Naruto's eye began to twitch, but then he sighed, and grinned. He wasn't even sure why he was still picking fights with Laharl. "Oh, and, hey, are all the unarmed combat skills going to be named after big cats? Tiger Charge, Lion's Roar, come on, tell me." Laharl shrugged, still chewing his gum. The flavor lasted longer this way, as well. "I think your next technique is called King of the Jungle, or something like that. I'm a sword specialist, so I don't really remember. Aside from that though, I don't think there are any more cat-related techniques." They were interrupted, as the door slammed open, admitting a yawning girl with her hair in 2 short, red ponytails. She was making no attempt to hide either her tail, or wings. Laharl-sensei, who is this?" "You've already met Flan, this is Edna. Think of them as my good and bad angels if you will." Edna snarled playfully, causing Naruto to flinch. Anyway, you wanted to see me, Your Highness? Laharl stretched, popping his back in several places before he turned back to Edna. Earlier, we fed Naruto's ninja sensei a crock of bull about how Naruto ended up staying here in a fabricated card game. He seemed to accept it for now, but I'd assume he'll be checking up on the story within the next few hours. He held out his hand, and his cape swirled around it for a moment before depositing an odd orb into his hand. As it turns out, there really was a party near Naruto's former dwelling last night. Your job is to take this, and fix the partygoers' memories to accommodate my being there, and the fictitious card game before the ninja gets there to question them. I've had you do things like this before, so you should know the drill. Feel free to take some time off afterwards, and take a look around the weapon shops. Just be sure to hide your wings and tail. Really? Thank you, Your Highness. Her tail immediately slid up, wrapping itself around her thigh under her skirt, as she left, oar in hand. She'd pick up a coat or cloak of some sort before she left the house. Laharl turned back to his pupil, and took on the tone of a lecturer once more, and Naruto snapped to attention. Now you've learned the first 3 techniques with gloves very well. You'll have the rest soon enough, as well. But first I want you to learn the first 3 techniques with your other weapons, as well. Versatility never hurts. Now you're going to notice that you won't learn as fast with the other weapons, as you will with gloves, and hand-to-hand combat. That's because your growth potential is higher in that area than with the other weapons to begin with. I'll explain the potential rankings. Growth potential is separated into 6 rankings, beginning with E, and then increasing up to A, and then S. To explain, if you're A ranked in swords, and B ranked in axes, you'll learn how to use swords faster than axes, and gain techniques faster, as well. You would be S ranked in growth potential for hand-to-hand combat. The rest are A- and B ranks, with 1 D rank. I'll let you find out which are which on your own. Naruto's eyes began twitching. What? Tell me. Oh? Well, I suppose I'll tell you one. The D rank is in guns. Actually, that might be a good thing, because guns are well beyond the current technology levels of this world's humans. I'd advise you not to go flashing that thing randomly. Anyway, feel free to take, as long as you want to learn. The item world is timeless. One thing you'll need to remember though, for demons, staffs aren't used primarily as weapons, but as foci for magical spells. As such, killing things with staff isn't going to earn you any battle techniques. As your staff skills increase, it raises the range and power of your spells instead, though you can increase the range and power by intensely training with your spells, as well. Training with both in combination can result in the point that a skilled magic user can blast anything within a mile radius, but most don't go that far. Just let me know when you're ready to learn magic, and I'll see about teaching you. For now, go to item world. Naruto grinned, and lifted up the sword Laharl had bought, instead of one of the pieces of gum. Laharl winced, but kept his mouth shut. He could warn the kid, but he personally felt that this was something he had to learn on his own. Naruto set the sword on the stone platter, and for less than a second he stood there, his essence having traveled to the item world. Then he flew backwards, beaten, slashed, broken, and obviously dead. Laharl sighed, as he stepped forward, and dragged the brat's corpse to the healing statue, leaving him beneath its hands. As the waves of soft green light began to sink into him, he sat back, and pulled out another stick of gum. Actual death would take a lot longer to fix than mortal wounds. Kakashi sighed in mourning for his Jounin-ranked paycheck. Sakura may poke fun at Naruto's ramen obsession now and again, but it appeared she had her own, lesser-known obsession. The girl was like a bottomless pit for sushi. Had he known that, he'd have taken them somewhere else to eat. She had had some modicum of restraint, while her Sasuke-kun was watching, matching him at 3 plates each. Then she went to the restroom for a moment, and Sasuke thanked him for the food and left. Frankly, Kakashi didn't blame him because fangirls were scary. When she had come back, she had been extremely disappointed to find out that Sasuke had already left. He had shrugged, and then foolishly indicated that she should feel free to eat more if she was still hungry. And eat she did 27 more plates of sushi before she decided to let up. It was insane, and then the girl had just smiled, and thanked him for the food, leaving him crying over the check. He shook his head, and continued walking. Laharl's explanation had seemed valid, but something smelled fishy. After asking a few questions, he'd determined that there really had been a party near Naruto's place last night. A pretty loud party too, by the sound of it. Just a little while ahead, he paused, as a girl passed him. She was a bit young for him, so he shouldn't even have noticed her, but he turned lightly, and watched, as the redhead paced away, and turned a corner. What was it about her that had drawn his attention? Was it her clothes? While she was only wearing a miniskirt, and top under her coat, that wasn't too terribly eye-catching. The coat did an excellent job of covering her, and he knew people who wore less, as a matter of course. Was it her hair color? Bright red was odd, but again, he knew people with more unique colors and styles. That shouldn't have caught his attention either. Her chakra levels were normal, as well, indicating a normal villager, so what had he noticed that had set off his internal alarms? He was still pondering this while he made his way to the building the party had been held in, and while he questioned the owners, who had been in the thick of the party, and noted everyone who had been there. Perhaps that's why he missed the way their eyes would glaze slightly, and then clear before they told him about the odd blue-haired guy. He wasn't much of a partier, just sat in the back, and played cards for the most part. Had a few drinks. That kid he dragged in, though that boy could go nuts. It wasn't until later, after he'd questioned several more partygoers, and received nearly identical stories from each, and was well on his way to the Hokage's tower, to make his report, that he realized what it was that he had noticed about the redhead. Like the blonde girl, and even Laharl, her eyes had been a pure, dangerous-looking crimson. Naruto sat up, clutching at his chest, eyes wide, and darting around for danger, and breathing heavily. As the seconds passed, his breathing slowed somewhat, and grew more relaxed, and his eyes came back into focus. They were so powerful. I couldn't even compare. Laharl nodded, frowning down at him. I could have told you before, but you would have become curious, and tested it anyway, without anyone to drag your sorry carcass to a healer powerful enough to bring you back to life. Now that you've experienced it for yourself, your future actions will be tempered with the wisdom that comes only from pain. You've just discovered that depending on which item you travel to, the manifestations vary in power. When we were in the gum world, enemies dropped with 1 or 2 strikes, right? I wonder if you even managed to kill one of the enemies in your sword. Naruto's eyes widened, as did his sudden grin. 2. I got 2 of them before the rest dogpiled on me. A girl dressed as a ninja, and a big lizard thing, with wings. Laharl's eyes widened imperceptibly at the boast, then he arched a single eyebrow. Did you know that's interesting? That changes my plans slightly. He shook his head, and smirked. In any case, I think that's enough traveling in the item world for now. We can get back to that later. There's still a great deal for you to learn. Now I'm training you, as my successor. I am the overlord. As such, I have my minions to delegate things that I don't feel require my personal attention to. As my protege, you will need your own minions, to begin to learn how to command others, but demons respect only power. Your choice of minions is limited to the types of demons you have personally slain. That's why I had you run through the gum world on your own. You'd killed zombies, ghosts, orcs, and several other classes there, opening up opportunities for your minions, and that is why I was so interested to find out that you'd managed to best not only a kunoichi, but a dragon, as well. Most impressive dragons are not only powerful, but they are one of the few monstrous demons that are immune to a specific element. In their case, fire. Dragons are also the most difficult to find and defeat. I'd intended for you to hunt down an aqua demon, or a mystic beast first. I still will, but finding a dragon on your own puts you well ahead. Good for you. I don't get it. Why do I need minions? I can just fight on my own. Idiot. You can fight one-on-one against someone your level, or take on a multitude of those less powerful than yourself, but for the moment you're still extremely weak. Remember what happened to the sword. If you had had minions to fight alongside you, you may not have won, but the battle would have lasted a hell of a lot longer. Whether you have many diverse minions, each with their own personal abilities, or a few minions that train with you more intensely to become a more cohesive fighting unit, you need to have minions if you want to survive long. Some of the places I'll be taking you to train will be extremely dangerous. If you want to go there, you'll have to have minions to help you fight when you need them, or you'll be killed easily. Death isn't necessarily irreversible, but your corpse has to be at least mostly intact. There are demons out there who make a point out of rendering everyone they kill into bite-sized chunks. At that point, the best I could do would be to stitch most of your bits back together and reanimate you as a zombie, and frankly I don't think I would bother, what with the effort that entails. Naruto grimaced, then paused to consider, thinking heavily. He didn't like having to rely on others, and preferred fighting on his own unless absolutely necessary, but his traitorous mind flashed back to Zabuza. Laharl had a point. Even to nick the powerful ninja, he'd had to work in concert with Sasuke. Had he just tried to fight him on his own, he would have died. He sighed, and grimaced, as he fidgeted with his mantle. He didn't really like wearing it, but it wasn't as restrictive as a fully surrounding cloak would be, and while a cape suited Laharl, somehow it would just make him look stupid. This, though, came to meet at a tie on his chest, and concealed almost all of his jumpsuit. Fine, I'll just have to deal with having minions then. Can't be worse than having teammates that hate me. Laharl arched an eyebrow, then shrugged. It wasn't any of his business how the brat dealt with his human friends. He stepped to the statue with the gavel, and locked eyes with it. After a moment, the statue's eyes glowed, and a small hole tore itself in the air in front of the statue. Laharl signified that Naruto should follow him, as he stepped through, and they reappeared in a small room with red carpeting. Naruto glanced around in shock. In a courtroom? Were they on trial? Laharl spoke up, as Naruto began to panic at the dangerous-looking demons seated around them. This is the main courtroom of the Dark Assembly. While, as Overlord, I am technically the supreme power of my Makai, there are many things that require the approval of the Assembly, such as opening gates to certain areas, or applying for minions to serve you. Mostly it's just the daily grind of government, but there are things they are more willing to do than others. For example, getting low-level minions is easy, as is reincarnation like the little fox, remember? While getting war funds from the assemblyman would be almost impossible to pass the vote. Of course, if necessary, I can use my influence to force a proposal through, but the assemblymen have long memories. That can be a good thing though. Run favors for an assemblyman, or bribe him with something he really wants, and he'll be more likely to vote your way for a while. I'll be teaching you some politics, so you can function here better. Who knows, once all your human friends die, maybe you'll decide to become an assemblyman yourself while you wait for me to pass on my crown. But in any case, I'll submit the bills for you this first time, for a dragon, a kunoichi, and a prinny. My what? Prinny? Why do I need a peg-leg penguin? TCH. You're underestimating them. And besides, aside from minions to fight for you, you also have to learn to let your minions take care of more mundane chores. That's where prinnies are most capable, with cooking and cleaning duties. I rely on Etna's prinnies because the servants of my servants are my servants, as well, but you're going to need a housekeeper. There will be days when my training will run you so fully into the ground that you'll barely be able to shower before you pass out in bed. At that point, you'll be very relieved to have a prinny to deal with cooking and cleaning things for you. Naruto frowned, then sighed, and shrugged. Are they any good in a fight? That depends. But have you ever been slapped with a large fish? It hurts. Some of them keep heavy butcher knives in their pouches too, and, okay, I get it. Sorry I asked? Good, any preferences? As to never mind, I haven't explained that yet. I'll just request speed for kunoichi, and strength for dragon. The prinny doesn't really matter, I'll just let the assemblyman do whatever with it. He filled out a few forms, then handed them to a nearby ghost to be distributed among the demons. The vote was called, with a resounding unanimous aye, and Laharl turned to walk his protege back out. Hey, I thought we were here to get minions, and now we're just going to leave? You're thinking too hard, idiot. Just relax, there are plenty of demons out there looking for work. They should be waiting for you by the time we get back. Also, I should probably let you know that this isn't the only way to get minions. If you can convince someone to join up with you, or force them to, that works, as well, though they tend to be a little less loyal than those who join through this process. And remember that humans can become powerful, as well, and are generally far more loyal than most demons, if you can talk them into joining you. Demons work for pay, and if someone offers to pay them more, they'll generally betray you in a heartbeat. A human can use demon weapons, learn demon techniques, become just as powerful as any demon even though they don't have the same kind of lifespan we do. Laharl sighed, and looked downtrodden for a moment before forcing a smirk back on his face. Of course, we tend to kill ourselves off fairly quickly, so barring those of us who become powerful enough to live for millennia, the average demon's lifespan is really more like a decade or so. I suppose it would be similar for the angelic beings, except that rather than battle each other, they tend to battle us. There is an uneasy truce between me and the Seraph, but that doesn't stop them from making war on other Makai, and we each have to be very careful not to step on anyone's toes, or battles will break out despite the truce. I suppose, despite the brevity of their lives, humans are the lucky ones. Only occasionally do they fight for the heavens or Makai, and few human worlds are foolish enough to descend into the near-constant state of war and chaos that is the norm for us demons. Sometimes I envy them for that. But we're here, and so are your new minions. Naruto could see them. The kunoichi was what he'd expected: black hair, slightly baggy, yet perfectly fitting black jumpsuit. Black face mask like Kakashi's. The only thing differentiating her from the mindless drone he'd killed in the item world was a blonde root here, and there, signifying that she needed to touch up her dye job. The prinny was unremarkable. In fact, it seemed to be trying not to draw attention to itself. Even so, it seemed to be a normal, except it's orange. Is it supposed to be orange? Laharl's eyes narrowed, and he was not supposed to be orange. He'd requested a random one, and they should have given him a normal one. Different colors signified different ranks and power levels. Orange prinnies weren't that much better off than normal prinnies, but the simple fact that it was here meant that it had requested the placement, due to the name he'd put down on the form. It wasn't acting quite like a normal either. A typical wouldn't try to remain unnoticed despite its skin color being obviously unsuited to stealth. A typical wouldn't bother because they knew that almost nobody paid attention to prinnies. He mentally shook his head, and relaxed. He would question the latter if its reasons were important, he'd inform the boy. If not, then it didn't matter anyway. But he couldn't help but remember the first time he'd come across an odd. The dragon had Naruto's jaw dropping, and not in a good way. The shrimpy lizard could probably, at most, stretch itself to hip height on Naruto. What the hell? This is a dragon? It's a shrimp. A gecko, with wings. A curl of angry gray smoke drifted up from the baby dragon's nostril, indicating that it did not appreciate the terms of endearment at all. Watch it, Buster, I may not be able to flame yet, but my teeth are still sharp, and guess what? I'm right at your crotch level. The dragonling's bold declaration set off a round of winces. Laharl in particular grimaced. So these were the brat's new minions? Impressive? No, not really. Not really impressive at all. No, wrong. Stop it. You're focusing too much on the mantle. The point of this exercise is to move the fabric like an extra limb. I'm not asking for much here, just to make it move. Flex it. Do you have to focus so hard to move your arms? No. Stop focusing, and just do it. Naruto's eye was twitching wildly. It was well into the night, and he wanted to sleep before he had to go meet his ninja squad. But he wasn't allowed to leave this room before he'd learned how to move his mantle. The worst thing was, Laharl had been yelling at him like this for several hours, completely throwing his concentration to hell. And, I can't believe I'm wasting my time on you, you no good, worthless imbecile, Naruto snapped, losing all control over himself, as he dived at his sensei, mantle flapping forward, and forming itself into a thrusting drill. Wait, what now? Naruto froze, turning his head to stare at the mantle. Yes, a drill made of fabric. Without thinking, he sped up the rotation, then slowed it down, and reversed it. He was so fascinated by the motion that he didn't even notice that the second he begun his lunge, Laharl had moved behind him fast enough to leave an afterimage, which was now slowly fading away. Laharl waited for him to notice, and waited, and coughed lightly to get his attention, and waited some more. A blood vessel slowly made itself visible on his forehead, as his cape swirled around his hand, revealing not his sword, but a large wooden hammer. He slammed it directly into the back of Naruto's head. Don't ignore me! Naruto mumbled something incomprehensible, as he lifted his head from the face-shaped imprint in the floor. Now that you've finally got the hang of it, I dunno. Experiment if you want, or you could just go to sleep. I have something to do. Wait! Don't go yet. I want to do the pulling weapons from nowhere thing that you keep doing. Show me how. I have to find it. I'll make this quick. While the fabric is swirling around your hand, concealing it from view, will the weapon you want from wherever it is to your hand. You have to know where it is though. Actually, it has nothing to do with the cape or mantle at all, it's just a distraction. Have fun, I guess. Naruto immediately forgot about sleep, and began focusing intently upon his hand, as though that would make it easier to call a weapon to it. The orange squeaked in surprise as a red cape darted around the corner, wrapping around one of its peg legs, and spilling the laundry it had been carrying all over the floor, as it was suspended upside down directly in front of Laharl's face. Hey! Put me down! Please? Laharl casually stepped across the dirty laundry, and opened a door into an empty room. He entered, and calmly closed the door before turning to glare at the, "If you please, I have a question. Who are you?" A small sweat drop appeared on the back of the prince's head, and it blinked slowly before answering. "I am," it said, lowering its voice, and motioning Laharl closer, as though it was about to reveal some deep, dark secret. A vein popped out on Laharl's forehead, and he directed his cape to wrap around the prince's center, and squeeze, turning it into something of an hourglass figure. Agony! Pain! Gah! After a moment, Laharl allowed the pressure to lessen somewhat. "Let me rephrase that. Who were you? Do I have to answer th agony?" Laharl had constricted his cape again. "Gah! Okay, I'll talk, but first, how could you tell?" Laharl arched an eyebrow. "It was obvious you were no ordinary within the first few seconds of seeing you. Out of thousands of princes, only one or two would choose to reincarnate as a higher level than another form, and even had you simply done so on a whim, a normal wouldn't have taken so much effort to avoid drawing attention to itself. It would have been known that nobody normally pays attention to princes unless they do something out of the ordinary, but you gave it away with your speech patterns. Nobody knows why, but all normal princes tack su on to the end of most sentences. You obviously didn't get around much, or you would have known this for yourself. Now you will tell me who you were, and why you requested this placement." He paused for a moment, then sighed, and began his story. "You should already know that princes are the tortured souls of sinners. When someone commits a sin, even an insignificant one, it is marked down, and tallied up. When that person dies, they become and have to work to earn enough money to equal their sins. Then they can go to the Red Moon, and their sins will be absolved before they are reincarnated. In my life I had committed a few minor sins, but nothing truly major. I was a ninja. I killed whom I was ordered to, and at times I did things that normal people may have considered wrong, but it was almost always justified. I played a large role in a war, bringing it to a close years before it would have without my efforts, and rose to a position of power within Konoha. I was the Yondaime Hokage, but a little over a decade ago, the village was attacked by a monstrously large, incredibly powerful demon fox, Kyubi. We sent all our most powerful ninja out to stop it, and it killed them, as though it were swatting flies. Entire clans were lost that day, because of my stubborn decision to stay and fight, rather than evacuate the village. Then when I found a way to defeat him, it came at a cost. To defend my village, I became a sinner beyond comparison. I sacrificed my life, offered my soul to a demon, and destroyed a child's future. Any one of those sins alone would leave me for centuries. All of them together? I don't think I will ever be able to be free of my guilt. That boy, when I died, I'd asked the village to see him as their hero. I honestly never expected to see him or them again, but the spirits of death allowed me to see, now and again, what was happening in my old home. They were not doing it to be nice. The villagers, even some of the ninja, would blatantly defy my dying wish. After only a year, I could no longer bear to watch, and threw myself into work. It didn't change anything, but while I was exhausted, I could forget for a short time. Then I was still an individual worker. I hadn't really put any thought into signing myself onto a long-term contract, but then the call came up for A, and it was his name on the form I had volunteered before I even registered myself stepping forward, and I never once considered changing my mind. I don't know, maybe, deep down, I thought that by placing myself in his service I could pay back some of the debt I owe him. It's so foolish to even think about something like that. Will you let me go now? Slowly, Laharl's cape lowered to the ground, and it carefully gathered up the spilled laundry before it paused, and turned back to Laharl. There were also two others, who seemed interested in the post, but unlike me, their sins were relatively minor. It won't be long until they go to the Red Moon. I'd keep an eye out for them afterwards. They seemed very interested in the idea of working for him. They left, leaving Laharl contemplating its words before he glanced out of a small window. Dawn. He shook his head, and headed back to the room he'd left the kid in. As he'd expected, he'd fallen asleep while practicing calling his weapons to himself, and was slumbering on the ground with his sword dangling limply from his grip. Laharl kicked him in the head. Gah! What the hell? What was that for? Aren't you expecting somewhere, in about an hour? Bathe yourself, change your clothes, then join me for breakfast before you leave. You can sleep while you wait for your sensei to arrive. Suspicions would arise should you miss another meeting so swiftly, right? Sasuke breathed a heavy sigh of relief, as he saw a distant figure begin to draw closer. The dove was coming today, then, thank God. He appreciated Sakura's attentions from a distance, a constant reminder of the fact that he was probably the most desired male in their generation, but he didn't like the thought of having to deal with her alone like yesterday again. He blinked, then looked closer at the running figure. What the hell was the dove wearing? Good morning, Sakura-chan. Sasuke team. Sakura had already clocked him in the head before she had fully turned from her crush to see the irritating blonde, and what he was wearing. Her jaw dropped in shock. He was still wearing his typical orange jumpsuit, but over that, Dobe, what the hell is that? Ah? I see you've noticed my stylish new mantle. Mantle? It's a cape done. Why the hell are you wearing a cape? Naruto blinked, then sprouted a wide grin. Well, I lost some money at the card game, but I won all sorts of awesome stuff, like this mantle, Sasuke team. Cape, mantle, cape, mantle. Sakura let out an aggrieved sigh. Why couldn't the idiot have just stayed away like yesterday, and left her and Sasuke-kun in peace? The kunoichi yawned, as she stumbled into the dining room alongside the dragonling. They'd gone to train a little on their own while Naruto worked with his cape, with the result that the dragonling was almost an inch larger than it had been. Glancing around, it became almost immediately apparent that none of the three at the table was their blonde boss, while the dragonling approximated a throaty rumble to its voice, as best it could, leaving it more of a slightly squeaky purr. Where'd the annoying brat go? The girls shrugged, and went back to their meal. Dragons, even little ones, were entitled to some measure of arrogance. After all, if they lived long enough to avoid being rendered down for armor parts, they tended to become the most powerful and richest beings around. With their hoarding tendencies, they were like pack rats for anything valuable or rare. Once they'd gathered enough, they tended to sleep in a pile of golden trinkets and coins. Laharl bit off another chunk of bacon and swallowed before answering. My pupil had things to do in the village. He was a human until I came, after all. Appearances have to be kept up for at least a little while longer. I really don't feel like dealing with the human's questions just yet. He'll be back later in the day. You'll have to find your own amusement until then. But by all means eat. There's plenty for both of my pupils' minions. The dragonling growled slightly, but snagged an uncooked leg of some sort of large beast off the table, curling up around it, as it tore shreds of flesh off. The kunoichi slumped down in the chair, and began cleaning under her nails with a throwing knife. I want to kill something. Kakashi was still suspicious about Naruto's new lodgings, although the story had checked out, and the Sandaime had even seemed pleased about it when he'd taken a look at the building's location with his crystal ball. He bit off a growl deep within his throat. Naruto's former apartment had been very close to most of the bars on that side of town. The random drunkards that vandalized his apartment were a critical part of bringing the boy to the breaking point. His will was strong, but sooner or later he would fall to the power of the dark side. He shook his head. That was what he got for watching a Star Wars marathon when he should have been sleeping. Even so, the quote was actually pretty valid in this instance. Naruto would be of most use to the village if he learned to use the demons sealed within him, but the experiences of his childhood would hold him back from choosing to use the evil energies. Even so, it wasn't impossible he could be pushed to the breaking point, where he would dip into the demon's power to brutally massacre the enemy. If he could be goaded to the point where he had no other choice but to use the demon. He shook off the nagging internal voice that suggested this was a bad idea, as he dropped down to the base of the bridge, sparing only a moment to glance at Naruto's new accessory. Good morning, everyone. I've got you all a nice D-rank mission from the Hokage's office. Naruto? Why are you wearing a bedsheet? It's a mantle. Kakashi's eye drifted over once more to Naruto, who was climbing up and down the tallest tree in their training ground again. Something was different about him, but he couldn't tell what it was. The cape thing was negligible, and wearing it everywhere was actually a very Naruto-ish thing to do. Either he'd get bored with it, and take it off eventually, or everyone would get used to it the same way they'd gotten used to the stupid orange jumpsuit that he loved so much. He'd taken to the D-rank mission with his normal excitement, and screwed it up in a variety of small ways that his teammates had to quickly fix. As usual, he hadn't begged Sakura for a date yet, but that wasn't actually something he did daily anyway. Frequently, but not daily, or maybe he'd just gotten a clue, and given up on the obsessed girl. Kakashi actually gave that a moment's consideration before banishing the idea. Naruto had been infatuated with her for years. Why would he pick now to give up on it? He'd been just as mildly antagonistic towards Sasuke, as normal too, and he'd been whining just as pathetically for Kakashi to teach him an awesome new technique before he'd been ordered to work on his control by tree walking. He also hadn't realized yet that if Kakashi really wanted him to work on his control, he would have given him another technique to do so. Tree walking would only go so far, and Naruto was perfectly ready to move on to the next stage of water walking. Had been for a while really, but that wasn't part of the plan. He gave a mental shrug, and turned back to Sasuke, completely ignoring the fact that Sakura had stopped her endurance training long ago, in favor of ogling Sasuke's shirtless form. He lifted his hand, and the taijutsu training began again, with Sasuke dashing headlong at him, and him taking full advantage of the holes in his students' defenses. Across the field, Naruto's eyes narrowed. Kakashi had finally stopped scrutinizing him. It was time. He looped around the tree, appearing to do so to dodge a branch, and created a Kage Bunshin that continued up the tree, as he leaped away, gone before anyone had a chance to notice. The clone would be sufficient to give the illusion that he was still there for the next few hours. At this point, Kakashi would only glance towards the tree now, and again to make sure he was still training. It would spend the rest of the day running up and down the tree, before stumbling off, exhausted, to Laharl's place, and dispel itself inside. If everything went well, none of them would ever realize that he'd be ditching them. Naturally, things didn't go smoothly. About halfway back to the inn, he'd run across a training ground where another group of rookies was practicing. He'd been quick to dart out of sight, and he'd slipped past the area unnoticed. With only a few close calls, Kiba would probably be able to tell that he'd passed by later though. He'd have to find a way to hide his scent, if he was to keep his business secret from people like the Inuzuka. The girl could be a problem too. He couldn't remember her name offhand, but she was a Hyuga. If he caught her attention, she could keep an eye on him even while facing the opposite direction. That would be bad for keeping his activities a secret. Had he looked behind him, as he patted the stone guardians, and entered the rickety building he'd come to view as home, he would have seen the very girl he was thinking about standing next to a tree, watching him. Naruto-kun? Naruto's sweat dropped at the sight before him. The little dragon was gnawing on some large bones, while Etna and the kunoichi were juggling what had apparently started, as only Kanai and Shuriken between themselves. Flan was squealing in excitement over it, and every few seconds she'd throw something sharp into the fray. So far she'd added darts, a few butcher knives, and a small hand axe, and she was glancing around for more. He glanced around the room, and his sweat drop grew. Laharl had turned his cape into a hammock, and was completely ignoring everything. He turned back to the juggling act, and then dived, wide-eyed, out of the way of a Fuma shuriken that both girls had failed to catch, and thumped deeply into the wall. Why the hell? Hey! The dragonling rolled one eye towards him for a moment, then went back to its meaty bone, and the kunoichi's reaction was far more pronounced. She immediately stopped what she was doing, and dropped to one knee in front of him, leaving all sorts of bladed instruments flying randomly through the air. Several terror-filled seconds of frantic dodging later, Naruto caught his breath, and glanced around the now spiky walls. Laharl's cape had risen somewhat to deflect the blades that had headed his way without him even needing to move, but the rest of them had more problems except the kunoichi, who hadn't even moved from her prone position. Ah hey, I didn't get your name, Mihoshi. Ah, Naruto gave another glance to the gleaming metal. For some reason, that name seemed surprisingly apt at the moment. Here's a piece of advice. When you're doing something that requires all of your attention, it's acceptable to finish what you're doing before acknowledging me. And if you weren't giving juggling bladed weaponry your full attention you should have been, I'll take that under advisement. A loud crunch echoed through the room, prompting winces, as heads spun to the dragonling. The bone it had been chewing had split down the middle. Gimme 5 minutes, this is taking up all of my attention right now. Sweat drops grew. This place was creepy. There was no better word for it. She just barely managed to catch a glimpse of Naruto's blonde hair darting around a tree before he'd seemed to disappear into the shadows. She'd excused herself, and followed him, actually having to resort to her Byakugan to pick up his trail. The place he'd gone to at first glance, it was an old, creaky mansion that was ready to fall over any day. But under the scrutinizing gaze of her bloodline the support timbers and interior structuring was revealed to be new. It was just that the outside had been third and fourth-hand, half-useless materials tacked onto the good underneath. Someone had built this building in an out-of-the-way corner, with the intent of making it look like it had been there for much longer than it really had been, and to the average eye, it would be almost indistinguishable. She turned the Byakugan off after entering the house, out of courtesy. She was beginning to regret it. Every hallway and corridor looked exactly the same, and there were no distinguishing marks on the doors. The only way to tell where she was by the decorations, but she'd gone through 3 very similar hallways where the suits of armor were in different alcoves every time. Oddly enough, she kept hearing muffled snickers in that corridor, but there was no one there. Every so often she could hear people talking to each other, but not enough to make out a conversation, and at one point she'd winced at a large snapping noise. Several minutes later she was almost to the point of defying courtesy, and activating her Byakugan to find her way through the maze-like structure, but the possibility of accidentally catching someone in the bath held her at bay. Her face grew to an atomic red, as an image of Naruto stepping out of a bathtub, towel wrapped loosely around his waist, seared itself into her mind. The incident had been just after they'd all become genin, a couple of months back. She'd finally gotten up the courage to speak to Naruto, and had gone to his apartment, but he hadn't answered the door. Confused, she had activated her bloodline to scan the apartment, and very nearly got an eyeful, as Naruto stepped out of his bath. She'd fled, red-faced, long before he made it to the door, but the image had stayed with her, and would surface at the most inappropriate times. She paused, as she turned a corner, identical to the dozen she had passed already. A door was open. Had she already come down this way? No, she could hear someone moving around inside. She slipped in, and came face to face with a man with blue hair, only a few years older than her, and behind him Naruto. She flushed lightly, and simultaneously hoped, and feared that he would turn around, and see her, but he didn't. Laharl stared at her for a moment, and then shrugged, making a note to teach Naruto how to tell if someone was sneaking up on him. If some girl had just walked in, and he hadn't even noticed, an assassin could take him out easily. Oh well, he didn't know how she'd made it here, as humans shouldn't even be able to navigate the maze of hallways on their own, much less see the doorway to this room, open or not, unless they were specifically invited. The odds of wandering the corridors randomly, and happening to notice the illusion covering the door were Astro specifically invited. He let out a large sigh, and grabbed the girl by the wrist, ignoring her softly stuttered protests. Idiot. Barely half a day after he'd gotten his first demonic minions, and he was inviting humans to join his ranks, as well. At least he could have chosen one that seemed worthy. This little girl looked to be more suited, as a housewife, or for concubine duties. He paused less than half a second to consider that may just be what she was intended for. Not his place to judge the kid's taste in that matter though personally, the empty eyes gave him the creeps. He slammed his hand onto Naruto's shoulder just as he set the orb he'd purchased on the statue's tray. Reality swirled around the three, and spit them out on a floating island next to a glowing circular pedestal. Runes slowly revolved around its edge, each relating to summoning and servitude. The true names of these objects had long since been lost, but the lowbrow masses had given them a new name, base panels. They could be found anywhere, and were useful to transport small groups of warriors immediately to the site of a battle. Some of the more paranoid demonic nobles, fearing assassination, would spend millions to have portable ones created to be shrunk and inflated with a trigger, bringing their armies with them wherever they went. Naruto hesitated in calling his sword. Why had Laharl chosen to come along? This was a low level, or nothing powerful for him to fight. Was it that he didn't think Naruto was capable of learning without him watching? Where? Naruto's eyes widened, as he spun to see, not only Laharl, but the Hyuga girl from earlier, as well. How did she do it? No, why did she? He'd been sure he hadn't been seen. But why would someone have even bothered to follow him? And why would Laharl have not only allowed her to watch his travel to the item world, something she definitely wouldn't understand, and might or might not refrain from speaking of, but actively involve her? Laharl sent a scowl his way, as he released the girl to stumble forward, and pulled a red slip of paper from his cape. He tossed it forwards, and it swelled up, forming into a floating door with exit stamped on it in bold red letters. Humph. Next time you've found a new minion, tell me before they show up. Got it? Laharl turned, and stepped through the door before Naruto could answer, or convey his shock at this turn of events in any way, and the door swung closed, dissolving into dust that floated away. Naruto could tell from the girl Hinata's widening eyes, and slightly fearful expression that the entities behind him had begun their charge. He reached into his mantle, and summoned his sword, and his gloves, which he tossed directly to her. Hinata! No time to explain, just put those on, and try not to die. She nearly swooned when he remembered her name, but the charging monsters, and the serious way he'd finished his statement convinced her to put her reactions on hold until she was sure she was in no danger of immediately dying. Multiple of the little floating islands later, Hinata had worn herself to near exhaustion. When the creatures on this island ignored her in favor of tending to their own business, she slumped down to the ground, panting for breath. Naruto tugged a small cloth from somewhere within his mantle, and used it to wipe the dark blood from his katana. She glanced down at her hands sure enough, although she had done far less of the actual fighting than Naruto had. The spikes on the gloves he tossed her were liberally coated with the liquid. She fidgeted, uncertain, as to begin cleaning it. Don't worry about it, Hinata. She flinched at the sudden statement, unsure of what Naruto was talking about. Some of this must have shown in her face, because he clarified almost immediately. The gloves, don't worry about cleaning them, I'll do it later. You seemed slightly queasy when you looked at the blood covering them, but from what I've overheard, your clan's taijutsu style is almost completely bloodless, so it probably wouldn't be a big deal. An uneasy silence fell between the two, as Hinata cast her eyes down, already evaluating, and second-guessing everything he said. It wasn't long before she realized he was trying to catch her attention again, and she flushed slightly. I'm sorry. See, could you say that again? Naruto blinked, then shrugged. Like I said, this is probably the best place to talk. When we leave, we'll arrive back in our bodies less than a second after we left them. While I want to know why you followed me, and how you found that room, it's not as important as explaining to you. He paused, giving great care to the choosing of his words, something Hinata was unaccustomed to seeing from him. But then, even with her surveillance of him, she wouldn't have expected to find him training on floating islands in the sky somewhere either. He sighed, apparently unsatisfied with whatever he'd decided to say. Laharl jumped to a conclusion when you walked in that door. Not the right conclusion, by any means, and I wouldn't have expected him to have sent you along with me either. I think he assumed that I had invited you for something, but with all you've seen, if he finds out that you weren't invited. He left the sentence trailing for a moment, then grimaced. There's no easy way to say that he'll kill you, to keep the secrets you've seen safe. Her eyes widened, then shot first to the gloves, then to the sword that Naruto had sheathed, and set to lean on a nearby stone. But I don't want to. He nodded somberly. To be blunt, I don't want him to have to kill you because you're from one of Konoha's most prominent clans. It would be very difficult to explain your disappearance, should we be questioned. Despite the joking tone, she could tell he was deadly serious, and she was beginning to internally panic. So we have two options. First is to have you play along for a little while until I can get you out of the building, and then have your memories fixed, though repeated questioning or analysis might break the false memories, leaving the real ones open. Second, he glanced at Hinata, and sighed. Nah, forget the second, we'll go with the first plan. I think she still has the, what would the second plan be? You really want to know? I doubt you'll like it. She nodded, leaving him frowning again. Alright. What Laharl thinks I invited you to be is a... He stumbled over the word minion, desperately seeking a word that wouldn't get him an up-close look at the taijutsu forms of the Hyuga. Is a vassal for me. Either to serve in battle, or I'd assume, as a maid of sorts. Plan 2 was that you actually become my vassal. I told you wouldn't like it. Vassals? What do vassals do? The Hyuga clan, or rather, her father, the head of the Hyuga clan, had vassals. What did they do? An image filled her head of her father, sipping sake from a cup, as one of his vassals slowly, sensually scrubbed his back for him. The images faded, and were replaced by Naruto and herself respectively. Surprisingly, she didn't blush at the thought, though she came extremely close to having a major league nosebleed. I'll do it. I mean, if you want. Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic. Link is in the description. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.